Tiga.
Hello, Miss Maya. This is our sixth assignment of drama about analyzing plot and characters of 14 short story. The members are Ratria, me, and Romeo. So don't waste our time so much. Let's get started. So we have exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution about the plot analysis. So I will start with the exposition. There are three things of exposition, which are the first is setting of place, and the setting of place is in dining room of a New York residence. A long table running from left to right with a chair at each end and 6 chairs on each side is set a laboratory for 14 chairs. The setting of time is in a winter at evening. And the characters are Mrs. Pringle, a high-class woman, Elaine, Mrs. Pringle's daughter, and Dunham, the butler. The next slide will be explained by Romeo.
Rising action begins when Mrs. Pringle is waiting for her 14 guests to attend at her party as Dunham the butler is setting the dining table. Then her daughter Elaine is coming bringing 14 cards and tables diagram. Suddenly, one by one of the guests calls Mrs. Pringle that they cannot come because of various reasons, such as Mrs. Sadwick, a widow, Mr. and Mrs. Derby because of their kid hit by chicken pox, and Mr. and Mrs. Fleetwood. Because of this situation, Mrs. Pringles feels frustrated and starts to call randomly her friends to come to her party as replacement of her absence guests. Dunham and Elaine offer several names to Mrs. Pringle, but she refused because of much reasons.
Okay, now I will explain about the climax. The climax is about Mrs. Pringle realizes a fact that her dining room's table cannot be 14, just like her hopes. She wants to impress the guest of honor, Oliver Farnsworth, who is the one she hopes that one day will marry her daughter, Elaine. Oliver Farnsworth is the important guest of Mrs. Pringle because he is an important man financially. If Oliver can come to her dinner party, she will become one of the important hostesses in the city. Unfortunately, Mr. Oliver calls Mrs. Pringle and tells her that he cannot come because of some business. Mrs. Pringle feels angry and anxiety because her most important guest is not able to come. Then she starts insulting Mr. Oliver.
Now we come to falling actions. Mr. Oliver sends his secretary along with a man to replace his seat. Apparently, the man is Prince of Wales. Acknowledge this fact, Mrs. Pringle feels thrilled.
Okay, now we reach to the resolution. Mrs. Pringle feels really grateful to Mr. Oliver to set the Prince of Wales in her dinner party because she becomes the most successful of hostesses in the city.
Now we come to the characters. There are some characters on this drama 14, such as Mrs. Pringle as the main character, Elaine, the daughter, as the protagonist, Dunham, the minor character, flat character, Mr. Ollivander Farnsworth, the minor characters, and also dynamic character, Prince of Wales as the minor characters, stereotypes characters, Mrs. Sedgwick, a widow, Mr. and Mrs. Darby, and Mr. and Mrs. Fleetwood as the minor characters.
Now we come to characterization. Mrs. Pringle a high-class woman with high ambition to become the highest level of social in the city. Elaine, who is Mrs. Pringle's daughter, who has charm and beauty appearance. Dunham, a butler who obeys her madam's command. Mr. Oliver, an important man financially in the city. And the last one is Prince of Wales, the anarchist. Okay, that's all our presentation about analyzing plot and characters of 14 drama. Thank you so much for your attention and finally, bye bye and see you